I remember after the jury came back with the verdict, they said guilty. I was completely dazed. I mean, just numb, just sickened and horrified. And I remember looking straight ahead and staring at the exit sign. And I kept thinking to myself, should I just beeline it towards that exit sign? Just run and just await the gunshots. Greetings and salutations. I am Victor DeSordi and welcome to my channel 28 to Persevere. Thank you for watching and please hit me up with a comment, subscribe, and like at the end of this video. Today we're going to briefly discuss my first 8 months of incarceration in the county jail and my subsequent trial and sentencing. Where do we begin? Well, the first 8 months of the county jail, I was literally in a daze. Complete and utter despair, depression, not really knowing what was happening or where I was going or the grand scheme of things. Being 19 years old, trying to wrap my mind around where I stood at that very moment in my life was an ordeal that really took a deep dive into my perspective on life and what I valued and where I was going. The trial, it took about 6 months for it to begin. I was 145, 50 pounds. I lost around 35, 40 pounds in the county jail. I was going through a very, very, very deep depression. I was barely really functioning in that sense. I didn't speak for almost a month, the first month I was in the county jail. I was on suicide watch for the first 2 weeks in an isolated cell that was in the very front of the county jail, like where you're surrounded by big illuminating lights all day, 24/7, with constant eyes on you from all four sides. The cell you're in is very small. There's really just a toilet, a hard bed, metal steel all around. It was a horrific initiation to this new way of existing. You're talking to a guy that, when I was a child, anyone who knows me, I was the life of the party. I had a will to live that was extremely strong and powerful, and I enjoyed a good time, having fun, exploring, and just diving into my world and the world outside, really appreciating where I stood and sit. And everything was turned on its head at that time, while I spent an insurmountable amount of time trying to make sense of who I was and what led me to here and where I was going from that moment on. Fortunately, my family was just as confused, devastated, obviously, and we tried to manage. We tried to manage the best we could. I periodically had visits when they were allowed to have visits. It was contact visits, thankfully, in the small visiting rooms that we had in the county jail. But my family saw my deplorable condition that I was turning into. I was deteriorating mentally, emotionally, physically. There was no doubt about that. You could not deny that. And now in hindsight, I can reflect and realize on how close I was to contemplating the end. I mean, I was really thinking about taking my own life, understanding that I was responsible for the deed that took place that night in my response to the altercation that unfolded. And I wasn't really sure, how do you value your own life moving forward? Where do you go? How do you think about what am I going to do with the remainder of my days that will, hopefully show some sort of purpose beyond that moment that you were suffering right then and there. So my family saw that. They came to see me, and my heart still aches to this day for them to witness my state of mind as it slowly descended into this deep, dark abyss. I realized at that time in my life also I was deeply into my head, And unfortunately, when you're deeply into your head, you can end up losing your mind. And it's almost a Freudian concept, but it's reality. And as I was slowly going through the motions, I was eventually released from the suicide watch. And I was starting to a little bit engage and communicate, especially with the fellow prisoners that were there in the county jail with me. I was considered a high-profile case because at that particular time in that particular county, they never had anyone facing a murder charge, incredible as that sounds, in that particular county. So I was in the jail, going through the motions. I wasn't really thinking about my daily grind or physical fitness or health or anything that developed for a purpose-driven life that unfolded later on after I went upstate into the prison systems. But that's a ways down the road. So initially, as a 19-year-old kid, I was just trying to make sense of where I stood. And as the days progressed, I was in decline. I realize it now. I was losing weight drastically, as previously stated. And I was meeting with my attorneys at the time, trying to make sense of their ability to defend me and get the truth of the matter out, because unfortunately the narrative, once you're placed in a position that I was in, it holds a negative connotation. The image projection is quite negative, to highlight the word negative. And I was in no really position to strengthen my case, understanding what I was up against at that particular time, not understanding really the entirety of the incident at that moment. I was in a daze. I was in a fog. It's bits and pieces come back to me even now, over 30 years ago. And as I awaited trial and trying to just make sense of things, I was in touch with the attorneys, as previously mentioned, and my family tried to keep me in high spirits, as they always do. And they were the gift from the gods, and a gift that keeps giving to this day. But I realized, I figured my life was over. It was just the equivalent of going through the motions, waiting to the final judgment. I actually honestly thought that. And it saddens me to realize to this day how close I was to the edge. And that's why I always tell anyone, keep perspective. Because it's what is happening in the moment is a moment. And the grander scheme of things is awaiting your next move in action. And the ramifications of that reverberate far beyond what you do to yourself. And keeping that in perspective really helped me understand that I needed to reflect and become more introspective, but not lose myself in my head, as I mentioned previously. So finally, to jump to the trial, which took place about 5 months into that, 5 to 6 months. That lasted a few weeks. To not really get into too deeply, unless comments would warrant it, to really get into the trial itself. It was a kangaroo court, to say the least. My family and I went through it, listening to the DA and his opening statements. Briefly, prior to the trial, it was revealed that the presiding judge had some type of relationship with the victim's family in this case. We respectfully filed a motion to have the presiding judge recuse himself from the trial, and he outright refused. We had the hearing, and nothing came of it, and he's stated unequivocally that he was the most competent presiding judge that could preside over this case. Unfortunately, due to what we perceived as deeply judicially prejudiced motives, we weren't confident going forward in the trial at all, based strictly on that presiding judge. The trial that subsequently unfolded, as stated earlier, it was a kangaroo court. One of the head jurors fell asleep during the trial. There was constant bantering back and forth between my attorneys and the presiding judge. I was in a daze, but lucid enough to see what was unfolding before me. And I saw, with a sense of crystal clarity, that the odds were stacked heavily against me. I had witnesses on my behalf to state that I was, in defense of myself and my lady friend. A lot of the evidence indicated that were in my favor. Unfortunately, due to extenuating circumstances, which is clear and evident to anyone who reads the trial transcripts, I was inevitably convicted of depraved indifference murder, second degree, and assault in the first degree. I had a long litany of charges on my indictment, which we won't bore with the details, unfortunately. It's so horrific. But as a 19 years old, facing this insurmountable, what I perceived odds ahead of me, I was convicted, and I was sent back to the county jail, where I was to await my sentence, which then happened about 2 months after my initial trial ended. The trial only lasted a few weeks. It was devastating, to say the least. I remember after the jury came back with the verdict, and we all had to stand, and they said guilty. The head foreman said guilty of murder in the second degree. I was completely dazed. I mean, just numb, just sickened and horrified. And I remember looking straight ahead and staring at the exit sign that was perpendicular to where the presiding judge was sitting in his throne. And I kept thinking to myself, should I just beeline it towards that exit sign? Just run and just await the gunshots. I mean, that's how I honestly felt at that particular moment. I never revealed that to anyone before, but that was what was going through my mind. And I kept thinking about all my family and friends that were sitting behind me, devastated. My sister, one of my sisters, my oldest sister, she leaped up off her chair and just took off. She couldn't bear to hear the guilty verdict. It was devastating for my family. Still is. And, I had a lot of supporters. A lot of people in my corner still do. And they're my rock, no question. And I'm grateful every day to have them. But at that moment, I felt more vulnerable than any person you could have possibly imagined. I felt lost, confused, deranged almost. But I didn't run to the exit. I stood my ground and waited to be handcuffed and slowly escorted out of the courthouse back into the waiting car and taken back to the county jail to await sentencing. It was sickening, to say the least. Sentencing unfolded, and that was, as I said, a couple months later. And I stood there and I awaited my sentence. And after it was rendered, I was completely lost. It was over in my mind. Like there was no really future ahead of me or for me. I didn't know what the next step was going to be, but I knew that at that point, whatever I believed, wherever I was, whatever dream I had, was irrelevant. I had an anger starting to build up inside me, a frustration, coupled with the extreme sadness and deep depression that I was still going through. I waited, and I just kind of cruised along, waiting for for the day that I would be packed up and placed on the draft, as they call it. When you get transferred to another prison, at this time from the jail to the prison, so you're going through a thing called the reception, which is when the prisoners from the county jails get sent to prison. When they await their sentencing, they prepare themselves for this draft. I was sent on the draft in June, packed up and shackled and brought with a few other men. And we were sent to Elmira Correctional Facility, Max 8 prison, but there's a reception center there where all prisoners in this particular hub, the hub's kind of like encompassing various districts in New York that get sent there, prisoners from these various districts, and they go through processing. And that's where I was sent. So that was basically my final destination. I'd like to end this video with a quote from Edgar Allan Poe from the poem The Raven, which is my all-time favorite poem. And I quote, "Deep into the darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before." It's very pertinent to this video and in the context of my life. Thanks again for watching my channel, 28 to Persevere. My name is Victor DeSordi. Please hit me up with a comment, press that like button, and subscribe if you haven't already. Much appreciated. Until next time, go with the gods and persevere.